everyone. Welcome to this edition of Out of Curiosity, where we share interesting information about people that cross my paths, and we try to share very interesting things that help me learn more about important things in the world. So today, we're going to be speaking with Shana Pederson. Shana, welcome for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And sorry, I'm doing this from a casino.
No, don't be. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about first and foremost. You're at beautiful Harrah's in Atlantic City. What takes you there?
So it's a friend of mine's birthday. We've been friends for over a decade, and it's her birthday. And we decided we all have our shots. We're all safe, so we decided to do the deed and come to Atlantic City for the first real excursion
That's
in a year.
amazing. I'm so glad. Please enjoy it. It is,
Thank
and I
you.
appreciate you taking the time out of your much deserved R&R. Shauna, you're in my paths have crossed over the years, through the eDiscovery social circles. Primarily, I've attended some of your events, the Life Preservers events, which I've been a supporter of, both an attendee and a donator. But first and foremost, how did you you work for as the e-data recruiting manager for Morgan Lewis? Can you tell us a little
Right.
bit about that real quick, and then let's jump into your work with the Life Preservers.
Sure. So I've been in legal recruiting for over 20 years. I was on the agency side really since 1999, 2000. I started the agency side, paralegal recruiting, and then eDiscovery started to happen. And so we started seeing a lot of paralegals and paralegal managers moving into the eDiscovery world. And then you start to see attorneys moving in. And so just over the years, my paths crossed with Morgan Lewis. They were actually a client of mine. I would just put people in there. And about 4 years ago, Scott Milner and Tess Blair decided that they wanted a captive agency. We have over 100 what we call e-data attorneys, which are permanent document review staff, and then we bring in temporary attorneys, and we have substantive attorneys. So we really have a very robust program. And the reality is that needs its own standalone function, and it goes beyond recruiting. It's making sure that everybody's working every day, that they're billing, that they're doing what they need to do. It's the care and feeding as well.
Right.
So it was a pretty interesting and exciting opportunity. Tess is super, super innovative. So we have all these side things that we get to work on. That's, really fun to be part of, on her coattails for that stuff. And so it was a unique way to go in-house. I got to sort of be the agency recruiter, but in-house at Morgan Lewis. And yeah, that's been fantastic.
That's been really exciting. And that's a great, I would love to actually dig a little bit more into your practice at Morgan
Sure.
Lewis about that, but we're not going to do that today because today we're focusing on, this is our last interview for Women's History Month, and certainly will not be the last interview with women as part of our podcast, but to showcase, just amazing women doing really powerful things for the community. I've always been curious about your nonprofit organization, Life Preservers, and its role trying to deal with human trafficking and things like that. So, can you give me a little bit of just an overview of Life Preservers and what it's all about?
Sure. So Life Preservers Project, we're a 501c3. We were founded in 2009, but filed our statewide nonprofit and then 501c3 filings application in 2010. April 2010 actually is when we were approved. So it's coming up in a couple of weeks when we were official. I was in art school, and I worked with a friend of mine who was opening what's called Restore New York. They're in Queens. They're one of the few halfway houses in Queens. And at the time, Faith was looking to buy a warehouse to turn into a halfway house. There are very few halfway houses for survivors here in the New York region. At that time, there was one other. And it was predominantly filled. It was all the court mandated, people. And so Faith was looking to open another one. She said, "Hey, let's do this art auction." And we tried. Most of us were in art school. It didn't go well because we were too broke to buy each other's art. But I recognized that as a legal recruiter, law firms are art galleries. You walk into a law firm, and they are modern art galleries. Some of the best art outside of museums happens to be in law firm lobbies in New York. So I thought to myself, well, they have art buyers at those law firms. They probably do. They do. And so I decided to try and use my influence as a recruiter and my connections in the legal world to both get more art, either bought or do art shows or something. I was really focused on the art initially. And then I realized, gosh, it's the legal industry. We can probably do so much more.
Hmm.
And it sort of just snowballed from there. And we have now been going for 11 years. We have our big annual event, which is what I think most people in the legal industry are familiar with. We've been incredibly blessed. It's a wonderful crossover in that the legal industry is our primary investor and donor. You know, Mike Dalowitz from the beginning was my angel investor. Joe Russo, a couple others. Merrill, when it was still a company, and DTI used to give us a lot of money when they were smaller.
Hmm.
And that's what launched us, right? These individuals that realized that human trafficking, both labor trafficking and sex trafficking, is a real thing in New York, happening to American women and boys and trans youth. And how do we fix that? What can we do as an industry? And so that has been the common thread that's been really wonderful, is that from that, all the eDiscovery vendors started being our donors. We're one of the few nonprofits where we're probably 90% corporate donor instead of individual donor. We're very blessed.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So
Yeah,
let's take a step back and could you help
sure.
me understand a little bit more about human trafficking is and what
Sure.
are the things what does that mean?
So human trafficking, most people now, I think, and it's in part because of media and because of the movies that have been around for the past that have highlighted, think sex trafficking, which is certainly a proportion of it. But human trafficking is any work that involves coercion. So if you're coerced or threatened into the work and then also not paid, it is trafficking. Sometimes human traffickers do pay on some level, whether it's subpar wages or they'll pay you, but then they garnish much of it for housing. So there's a lot of different ways that pay happens, but then it doesn't happen. So the international description of it is under force and coercion. So any labor that's under force and coercion. Sex trafficking, what differentiates it is it's any minor who is either trafficked or prostituted is considered trafficked. If you're a minor, it's sex trafficking. If you're an adult and you can prove force or coercion, whether or not you've been paid, if you can prove force and coercion, it is sex trafficking. And many states now have safe harbor laws. So if you are a prostitute and you get arrested, or a sex worker and you get arrested, and you can prove that it was forced and coerced, or you're a minor, you no longer have to face criminal charges. Whereas even 2-3 years ago, folks did have to face criminal charges. And it used to be the Johns didn't face criminal charges. Now the Johns face the criminal charges. So there's been a shift. Our organization focuses on sex trafficking, but it's also very important to point to that labor trafficking happens. And labor trafficking is epidemic in this country. And a lot of people don't see it. It became worse over the past 4 years because immigration protections were reduced. Traffickers, farm labor, meatpacking labor, hotel labor, nail salon labor, spa labor. It's easier, unfortunately, to not pay them because they have fewer protections. They have fewer abilities to report any abuses than they did even 4 years ago. So we try and focus on both.
Right. So I mean, and what in terms of how do you work with that community? I mean, obviously, and we'll talk about the art program in a minute, but how do you actually interact with the community, and how does the money flow back to the community?
So a large part of our funding over the years has flown back to halfway houses that we are aware of, shelters and halfway houses that we're aware of that were housing what would loosely be considered survivors. So we don't do, until 3 years ago, we didn't do any direct services. We were raising money for organizations that we knew, we research and vet, and we knew were doing the good work. I often, was involved with the organization on some level myself. So we would ensure that they would be getting the funds that they need because it's very expensive. And human trafficking, even though it's in the news a lot, and you'd think, oh, you would get lots of money for that. It's very, very hard to raise money for it. People, especially if the sex trafficked victim is a young white girl in Detroit, you might get money for her.
Mhm.
If she's the average victim, or they or he or whomever is the average victim, they're going to be a black or brown youth in New York, New Jersey. It's very hard to raise money for them. People don't see them as victims or
Right.
survivors. So the halfway houses are typically underfunded. So we funneled money to that.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. In preparation, I perused the trafficking persons report from the state Department of State, and one of the things that really stood out to me is that we're seeing an increase in human trafficking in males. now, for one, and then number two, also, something to think about is also part of it is the transport. Some people forget about it's the person that the people that are actually, moving the people from place to place are actually, are a significant part of the problem. This isn't just a John
Sure.
prostitute situation. So
Oh
there's a
yeah.
whole syndication element around
Oh,
this, right?
it's a $1 trillion industry. It is incredibly lucrative industry. Labor trafficking, sex trafficking gets a lot of, again, that's what gets the most focus. Labor trafficking doesn't. Labor trafficking is involved in everything we're doing right now. Our phones, our laptops, everything. The
Hmm.
water we drink, the food we eat, there's labor trafficking, particularly in the States right now. The transporters, I come from the Southwest, so I'm very careful to distinguish between coyotes who are not human traffickers. They've been paid to transport people. People willingly wanted to come here, right? That's
Right.
not trafficking. And that was one of the biggest problems over the past 4 years is that was conflated.
Hmm.
The idea of being brought to the U.S. by willingly paying someone to bring you to and I understand that the abusive practice is how expensive that is. Still, that is not trafficking. But there is a massive problem trafficking on the border. And I have friends who are truckers. So I hear from them what they're seeing through truckers. There's Truckers Against Trafficking, which is an organization that truck drivers spend a tremendous amount of time looking out for signs of it as they're on their route. Really cool because they see it so much, right? It's really gotten bad on the border.
So I've heard. Actually, I was speaking with a client of mine. Her husband he actually does private investigation work. Looking for those, and we're hoping to have that as a follow up podcast to this to talk about that, what it's like on the border. So hopefully we'll get that to share with you as well. It's really a fascinating story, and it really kind of piqued my interest around, some of the ways that we can actually help in the front lines. You had mentioned that you're now doing services. Can you tell me a little bit about those?
Yeah. So I went to art school, and I have a BFA, and I'm a painter. And then interesting enough, through working at Morgan Lewis, we took a lot of design theory, design thinking training, and we worked with IDEO and Six Sigma Lean, which does a lot of the design thinking and that kind of. And I said to myself, I think I can put the art and the design thinking together and create a program where I teach the survivors or the whatever they want to call themselves, the art. I teach them these skills. There's a wonderful book that's been out since the late 60s, early 70s called Painting on the Right, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And the idea is if you when you draw, you utilize the right side of your brain, and you shut down a lot of that analytical judging. All these things start if you keep at it with contour drawing and line drawing and things. It starts to bring this sense of calm and peace, and it actually boosts endorphins. And it's used often in rehab programs now. This a certain program that comes through that is used in rehab programs. It's often used for survivors of sex abuse and domestic violence. So I thought to myself, why don't I apply some of that theory into the art? The clients I'm working with are in youth shelters. They're in the life right now. They're still high. They're still on the drugs. How do I work with them to teach them to use this skill? We're not just going to do collages and the pretty stuff. A lot of really giving them some skills, and then we would give them supplies as well, so they could continue outside to apply the skills. Then I started taking it. I was supposed to start working at Covenant House, running their art programs through Life Preservers. We were going to take a step further. We were going to teach them. So it's participant involved training. Mm-hmm. So they would learn how to do it. They would inform how they wanted the art class to happen. Then they would start learning how to teach it themselves. All the other students start teaching them how to teach it. So that was the kind of teaching methodology that I wanted to, active learning that I wanted to bring in. And so I created a whole program through Seton Hall. I was getting my master's degree at Seton Hall at the time. And so I created a program through the art department and the education department at Seton Hall to start providing that kind of training, art training to the survivors, with the theory that I would do it for a little bit and then they take it over and make it their own. So it gives them a sense of empowerment, gives them some life skills. If you're drawing and you can really do the work, you can be sitting outside as they would or wherever and lose yourself for a bit, but in a healthy way. It gives them a healthy alternative to losing themselves, and it helps a lot with mental health. You can start talking about things. One of the coolest things I've done with them, it just happened by inspiration. We were talking about is we did, a line drawing, an empty line drawing of your sort of your face and torso. So it's just the lines. And then you switch it. You do your partner, they draw yours, just contour, and then you switch it, you paint it, the inside. And so you get to see. So you would draw, I would draw myself, you would draw yourself, then we'd switch it. And then you would paint what you're seeing, and I would paint what I'm seeing.
Interesting.
And particularly for the youth that are transitioning, it was a really neat way for them to see how others, because there was a lot of negativity in the shelter. They're teenagers. It was just, they're just teenagers. But it helped them a lot to how they saw each other. And then we'd start talking about how they saw each other, how their art partners saw themselves and saw each other, and why, and what did that bring up? What feelings, what fears did that bring up, or good feelings by any means. It gives a way to kind of talk about things in a safe manner, because art is,
well, you don't have to be a
objective.
professional art therapist. You can, but you are doing art therapy, and that's it's amazing. And so, what kind of impact have you seen with the people that you've been working with?
We did it for about a year before COVID happened. I don't know how much of impact I had outside of the fact that they kept on telling me to come back. I was supposed to do it once a month. They wanted me to come back every week. They were really seeming to enjoy it. They start bringing their kids. They have like littles. So the littles start showing. The littles were amazing. That I really got into. I didn't think I would. Really love working with the littles. So the art class, man, that Sunday art class was full. It started out a couple people. What I did see was there was a couple individuals that one gentleman who he definitely has a meth problem, and he would come in, he'd be all over the place, like really just all over the place, right? And he would constantly get by his Johns, and always messed up, and it was just always, he would start out kind of all over the place, can't draw, and he would rip his paper. So, and he wanted to sit aside, and I learned really quickly, let me just let him sit over there and rip his paper and do his thing, because after about 20 minutes he would calm down, and he was a phenomenal artist, and he would just start doing these portraits of the people around him. And he would be so, by the end of the class, by the end of the hour and a half I was there, he would be so calm. He would just be sitting, and he would just be doing, and he was breathing. And it was such a beautiful thing, because when he came in that door he was a mess. By the time he was done, he was just there. And the other thing I saw was communication between the group. They all know each other. They fight and they bicker and they do the thing. I allow that. The shelter leader doesn't love it, but I allow the bickering and the communicating, because they start to bicker and communicate over the color of, I don't know, that's not orange, and it's so much fun, because they are finding a way to communicate and bicker about color,
right,
or the bird they drew. And I keep on reminding them there's no right way to paint. We would do still lifes, and they would go every which way but the still life. But these amazing things would happen. The conversations, the joking, it was get really loud. And it was so I don't know if I had an impact, but I know that I gave them a space for an hour every Sunday where they knew they got food. They knew they could just let go, and no judgment, just let go and experiment and do what you can with the paints. I didn't care what kind of mess you made, just have fun. And then I started pointing the ones that wanted to be my helpers and wanted to do more. That was neat too, because you see them growing and wanting to have leadership roles. And I doubt I have anything to do with it, but the ones that decided they wanted to be that, they now have jobs and apartments, even in the midst of a pandemic. They pulled so I don't think I had anything to do with that, but you start to see different little ways that starts to grow.
Well,
So,
it's amazing. I've always found that it's really the small things that sometimes have the biggest impact. Sometimes if it's just sometimes it's a nugget of an inspiration, or just giving some space for someone to calm down enough, and from an art perspective. And again, mental health is such a key thing, and art is such a really an important way of doing it. So, tell me a little bit about, because I don't I've been to several of your Life Preserver events over the years, and as you all know, and I remember the last one that I went to, I think it was the 9th annual one, where there was an auction, and I was able to pick up the surfboards that you have, right? And I love this one, right? You're on mute. But
oh goodness, that one's, yes.
I love that one, right? And so
We
this
all
was
love that one.
right. So
I
I
love
picked that
all
one
of
up.
them, but yeah.
So tell me the story behind that, because there was a story
Yes.
and it was way too loud and I couldn't hear anything. So please, could you share that with me because that's personal to me.
Okay. So before I started the nonprofit, right, it was an art auction. It was us trying to raise money for faith through an art auction. And I've been showing in galleries, group shows around New York, and I know a lot of the, quote unquote, street artists or, collaborative artists around the city. And when I started this, I went to them and I said, would you guys be willing to help me with these projects, donate some art to do an auction? And sometimes we've had live painting, or we used to do pumpkin carving. And so everyone's getting nosy. We she actually was part of my nonprofit for a long time. The girl we're here for the birthday. So they started agreeing. So we have done a different theme every year. We've had backpacks. One time it was just they donated their art. The first one started at Gantt board. I want to say it was the 5th or 6th year.
Yep.
People just donated their own art. And then we started doing themes. So backpacks was one that was really important because we do, Maribel and I do the backpack every year. And then also if you're houseless, if you're unhoused and you're in the street, a backpack is probably the best thing you can give, even more than food or money. A backpack is gold, that and a tent. And so we did backpacks. We had people paint backpacks. That one was amazing. We did the surfboards and the skateboards. We did hats. We've done martini shakers. So we try and do these different things where the artists I give them the material and I just again, I don't control it. I don't tell them what to paint. I don't know what they're going to paint. I don't know until I get it back. Mm-hmm. They know to be appropriate, but I don't ish know your audience.
Right.
But otherwise, and that's been another really wonderful crossover is that we've had the legal community really, really involved. We've also had the art community in New York heavily involved. And some of these artists are quite famous. And because of that, it's also given some credence to some of the artists, some of the youth that I've taught. I've connected them with those artists. So now they're starting to show through the collaborative groups. So they're starting to get involved in that, which is super important. It gives them another community to be involved in. So it's just all these neat little random connections have flown together to make the nonprofit work. I have very little to do with it. It's just all the other humans that have cared and gotten involved and seen the importance that have made it this rich thing that it became.
Right. So how does someone get involved other than, coming and buying art from one of the events that hopefully we'll start having in a few more months, we hope?
Hopefully, we're going to definitely do the remote event. We actually have on April 21st, we are doing our first ever legal roundtable. So we are going to have 3 attorneys who work in the trafficking environment. One is a civil attorney. He after the criminal piece is done, he does the civil suits for the survivors. 2, one had been an ADA and a prosecutor, and another one I think is on the criminal side. So we have these 3 attorneys that are going to do a roundtable talking about the law, about the impact that lobbying and the law and all of that can have to better influence the legal remedies for the survivors. Because there is still, even though there are safe harbor laws, there's a lot of issues because often while they're not going to get charged for trafficking, they'll get charged for all the other ancillary and end up with felonies anyway.
Right.
And so that starts this sort of path that they can't come back from. Even if they were trafficked, they'll catch the drug charge or whatever. So it'll be nice to start getting involved with that. I think if we can drive everybody to go to that and maybe start doing those more regularly, I'm hoping that we can do those either biannually or quarterly so that we can start getting more of the influencers in our legal community, start thinking about how they can help from that legal standpoint, not just contributing funds, but how can we as a community, as a legal community, start to maybe influence legislation or be available on a pro bono level for the survivors. What can we do? Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that that's something that we can start to do a little bit more of. Knock on wood, somewhere wood, we will start having events again. I would love to have more people in the legal community who are artists or musicians or dancers, any kind of art, written word, I don't care, to get involved. I am hoping that we can start getting back into the shelters and teaching. So if anyone wants to volunteer with me or come work and do that work, it is incredibly gratifying. It is a ton of messy fun. It is just wonderful.
So how do
So
people
those
get a
are
hold of
ways.
you for that, Shana?
So our website is the best way. We have multiple different ways to reach people through the website. That is the fastest way to reach all of us. Myself and Maribel get the emails right away. You can contact me at the firm. The law firm is really incredibly supportive of this from the top down. Everybody knows about us and is supportive of us. Actually, the year that we did those surfboards, tested one of the little mini surfboards. It was fantastic. It ended up getting bought by someone at PwC who thinks she should stop being a lawyer and start being an artist.
Inspiration comes in many places.
Inspiration. Scott took a pie in the face, I think, twice.
I did. It was great.
So we always need pie victims. There's one. We need pie victims for whenever we're back in. All right. But no, people can reach out. The other thing that we're looking for are people who are interested in writing for us. There's a lot to be parsed through. I'm sure you said you looked at the tip report. Mm-hmm. There's just volumes of research and data being done. And so people who want to get involved in going through the research and the data and writing on it so we can continue to provide information. Because one of my goals, we're incorporated in New York State as an education nonprofit. Mm-hmm. I think education is more important than anything else in this, outside of the work I'm doing directly with the clients. People learning that this is a bigger, broader issue than whatever you're seeing sensationalized in the news. This is a real everyday thing. So that's one way. I'd like to start working more with the banks. They're doing some tremendous work with AI, tracking down the funds. That's how they're finding the victims, and that's how they're finding the traffickers, through the transactions, through the money. And AI is getting involved in it. So I think that's something our industry can maybe get involved in a little bit more.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating, actually. Now you've got my data mind percolating.
Let's talk. There's a gentleman that maybe we can get you on with us on one of the other podcasts. There's a gentleman from Scotiabank who heads up Project Shadow. And I've spoken to them a couple times, and they're running the AI, and they're tracking down globally through transactions.
What is Project Shadow? Could you look?
It's Project Shadow it was developed, I think, by Scotiabank, mm-hmm. and they're using AI through the AML KYC programs there at the bank, and I think other banks are now signed up. And essentially, what they can do is through the AML KYC software and the process that I know nothing of, but we're going to pretend I do. It's just like law. I know nothing of it, but I'll pretend. They have really strong AI developers who develop these tools that are able to, for instance, you have a bread store somewhere that is bringing in not very much money, but then at 2:00 every morning, all of a sudden they got $10,000 coming in the door. Mm-hmm. Their software starts to go ding, 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 ding. A human will never find that. The feds, whoever is doing this, will never find that. But the software at the banks are starting to wait a minute, these transactions are weird. This money's coming in at weird times, or these trucks. We're seeing all this movement at weird times through the tolls, right? So the software starts to see that and pick that up and parse that, which I'm really fascinated in, because eDiscovery, I see just the techie nerdy piece of it, right? So I'd like to see if our industry can somehow do more with that. But there's a lot of ways to help. There's a lot of innovation that could happen. But most importantly, I want people to know that this is happening in the tri-state area regularly. Know the signs. Don't be afraid to make the calls to Polaris or any of the organizations, any of the hotlines if you see something suspicious. One thing I'd really like to say is the Save the Children hashtag from QAnon is not real. And Save the Children is a real organization. They've, I think, changed their name now because of that hashtag. Know the difference between what's really happening and what's some of the sensationalized media hype, particularly with the Save the Children hashtag, and some of that is happening now. Be careful if you see something. There was the furniture store one. Mm-hmm. Don't keep on reposting that, because what happens is when you see those ones, I tell people, you see those, send them to me. I'll research. I'll let you know if it's real or not. I have resources to find out if it's real. We'll go look for it. We'll make sure it's real because what happens is when people post these fake stories and this fake sort of outrage, organizations like Polaris, the national hotline that is funded by the government for survivors, they get so many calls that they can't get the calls from the real victims anymore.
Mm.
It's so clogged with all this noise. So I think just education, just being aware, knowing it's real, but also knowing the difference, being intentional, and being certain that you are helping and supporting and being an ally of the individuals who truly need it. Because right now, because of all this noise, they're having a very hard time getting resources. They're having a very hard time getting support. Right now, the feds and the police don't know which way they don't know what's real or not. They're not responding to stuff. So I think, us as individuals being aware.
Actually, let me make a point, because you mentioned something a little bit earlier in terms of knowing the signs, and that was one of the things that I thought was fascinating. And as I was just from the general public education I've had from life preservers, from the exposure I had with your organization, I go to airports and I'm on airplanes and I look at things very differently now because of that. So can you maybe share some of those for the audience, let them kind of know what some of the signs are?
Yeah, the signs, again, aren't always what they seem. But if you see a young person, um, an airport is one. If it's an actual they're being trafficked. They might be lagging behind, but this can also be cultural. So you need to be very, very intentional about what you're seeing, because it can also be a cultural thing, not necessarily. So you got it. Don't profile. But if you see a young woman who, particularly if they have neck tattoos, certain kinds of tattoos or what are their brands, but that also isn't always a sign. But if you see that they're kind of cowed, they're not really willing to talk. Typically, they look a little pallid, a little tired, probably walking a little funny, let's be honest, especially if they're young. If they look really, really young and have all those signs, you probably want to say something.
To whom? To whom do you say something?
Well, the airlines, all the airlines are trained. They do extensive training. So the flight attendants all get trained. American Airlines, United Airlines, Delta, JetBlue, all of those have anti-trafficking training. They are actually the leaders in the training. So they're trained to de-escalate. They're trained to see it. They probably saw it before you did if it's real. And they generally, there's always an air marshal on every plane. So they'll alert the air marshal. Don't ever intervene on your own. It is best to let the flight attendant know. She'll talk with the air marshal. It's on the flight, and then they'll take care of it. If you see a situation, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers are also highly trained in this now. They are actually one of the lines of defense right now. They are doing better than almost anyone else. They've stopped like millions of dollars worth of trafficking.
That's amazing.
And saved hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of girls and youth. Because Uber drivers, that's part of their training now. And they're really adept because they see people all day. It's all they're doing. They see people. They've learned just to instinctively know something's wrong, which is really cool. But this is all sex trafficking. Labor trafficking is a little bit harder to see. Labor trafficking is about being a little bit more vocal. Some of the things that you'll see, and this pisses everybody off, but nail salons often they're not being paid, or if they are being paid, they're being paid sub minimum wage. It is legal in this country to pay sub minimum wage to anyone who's deemed to have a disability. So you see a lot of the garment district and things like that using people with disabilities to make items because they can get paid sub minimum wage. So, if you start seeing instances that might be sub minimum wage, again, unless you're trained in de-escalation, I wouldn't suggest that anyone actually intervene. But you can make reports to Better Business Bureau. They've probably gotten a lot of, you start to see it, you start to feel it. One thing I like to say is not all massage parlors are trafficking joints, but you can tell when they are. Some of the things that you can see, particularly if it's in a strip mall. So if you look around the back, you'll start to see coffee pots and like just life stuff outside. You'll just start to see that someone's clearly living here, right? Or you'll see that the girls are never leaving. The people are just going in. There's one by a tattoo shop I used to go to, and she's like, the girls never leave. You can see they basically have the kitchen out back. The guys are always coming, and the women are always coming in and out. Call the sheriff. I hate to say that. I'm not really a fan of that, but in that instance, you call the sheriff. But labor trafficking, it's hard. We're not in the Northeast. We're not in farmland somewhere, but it's marijuana is legal in New Jersey now. We're probably going to start seeing an influx of that here as the farms start to grow. very
Mm,
common, sub minimum wage, subpar wage, traffickers coming in to pick and do all that because it's not federally legal. So
gotcha.
they don't have the protections.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so, construction, day laborers, if you're going to hire day labor from Home Depot, make sure you pay a minimum wage. A lot of
right.
people don't, or better, pay them $15 an hour. You're
Hmm.
still paying less than you would pay for the contractors, right?
Right.
Pay them $20 an hour, give them food, give them, whatever. So a lot of people don't even realize that you go, you get someone to help you out mowing the lawn or whatever. They might not be being paid minimum wage. They might not be treated right. Pretty common. So just
Well,
in our
well,
day to day, just be more aware.
right. Well, thank you for opening our eyes to a lot of this. So, could you
Yeah,
give everyone kind of the what's the the life preservers? What's the domain? How do people reach you? What's the best way to stay in
sure.
contact?
So we're lifepreserversproject.org, and info at lifepreservers.org is one of the best ways to reach us through our website. Um, One of us will get back to, I think Dean, Maribel, and I all have access to that. Reaching out to, I think most of the people in the actual industry know us, so just reaching out to us individually if you're interested. We're always looking for volunteers. I said, people want to write.
Donations. Do you want money?
Yes, we absolutely always want money. I will never say no to money. Yes, donations are really important. We take both the financial donations and in-kind donations. We put together care bags, and so if people want to donate in kind, if people have supplies like backpacks or sanitary napkins or single-use food, all of these single-serve food, all these kinds of things, we'll take that as well as funds. But absolutely, funding is really, really important. It's how we continue to do what we do. We get the research done. We're going to do these roundtables. We'll start doing events again. But we donate over 80% gets donated
That's
to
amazing.
organizations doing the work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, again, Shauna, thank you so much, and especially taking away from your
It's
lovely
fun.
weekend. It's
I'm
nice to
getting
see
a
the blue beach
tan
sky.
while we're doing it.
Exactly. And I'll make sure that we'll add all the liner information related to life preservers website and contact information for you. And again, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing, and thank you for all of your passion and motivation with this amazing
Thank you.
project.
Thank you, Jason. It's an honor. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
You too.
All right, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Please, if you like what you heard today, like, subscribe, do whatever you need to do to keep us knowing this is you're enjoying the our podcast. So thank you very much for joining us for this episode of Out of Curiosity, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.